Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear. You ransom me with blood.
Good morning. How y'all doing? Good, okay. I just wanted to say a word before we get rolling. Go ahead and open to John chapter 2. That's where we're going to be today while you're opening your Bibles. Alan, during announcements, he mentioned about Wednesday nights, Forensic Faith. We have 3 more sessions of that left. If you have not been to the previous, doesn't mean you can't come to the final 3. One thing I want to say about the importance of the enterprise known as apologetics, being able to defend the Christian belief. A lot of times it's framed as a tool for evangelism, and it can be, to help kind of tear down the false ideas, the obstacles that stand between people, and the reasons why, or excuses why, whatever it is, that they don't want to believe the truth of Christianity. But there's also the point, and I think Alan mentioned this, about just defending your own faith. Right? If your faith is just a shallow faith that is based on nothing but your subjective kind of personal experience, it's very, very well possible, and there are many testimonies that whenever the hard times come, whenever struggle comes, whenever tragedy comes, it doesn't have the roots to withstand. And so, but if you know, if you have some knowledge, if you have some understanding, if you have some evidence, if you have some reason behind what you believe, then you can stand and go, you know what, I don't have to understand it. I know God is good. And I know this is true, and it's not just I feel it's true, it's not just I want it to be true, it's not just that it makes me feel good to believe it's true, it's that I know it is true. And so you can stand firm in those moments. That's my rant about that. So that's why on Wednesdays, what we've been studying in Forensic Faith has been so fun. Also, like I said, we have 3 more sessions of that finished, and then we're a little overdue, actually, for our next question and answer event. That's going to be a lot of fun. I believe, that it's not a promise, but I think Kenneth is going to come back again. So we have, our Baylor sociologist. And then I believe Dr. Krause might also join me. And so you'll have a panel of 3 to answer questions. And so that should be a lot of fun. All right, John chapter 2. So we're going through the life of Jesus. Right, and here we are. He has called some disciples. He's off to Galilee. And what is the first thing that he does? Right, freshly baptized, face down Satan, has called some disciples, and he goes to a wedding. What we're going to see is this is actually the first of 8 signs that John records. Remember, Luke is the only one who's really trying to record all the events as they happen in order and kind of situate Jesus' teachings in their actual setting. Because back then it was not unusual for people to write a biography with a theme, with a point in mind. Not chronology, not precision to detail, but to make a point. And so John actually organizes his gospel around 8 miracles. And he even tells us the reason he is writing his gospel is so that we will believe. In chapter 21, verse 25, he says, there were also many other things which Jesus did. That is not the verse I meant to read. Oh well. Elsewhere in his gospel, John does say that the reason he's writing these down, the reason I have written this is so that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And right there he says, there's lots of other things he did, but there's 8 specific ones he's going to point out. And the first one is this wedding in Cana, where he's going to turn water to wine. In chapter 4, he heals a dying man. In chapter 5, he cures the paralyzed man. Chapter 6, he feeds the thousands. Chapter 6, again, he walks on water. Chapter 9, he restores sight to the blind, and he raises a dead man in chapter 11. And he creates a meal in chapter 21, breakfast for his disciples. And then John tells us, and there were lots of other things he did, but John's making a point with each one of these miracles that he records. So the first one, here we are in chapter 2. Jesus is at a wedding. It's a celebration. Right, there's going to be 4 points, and if you like alliteration, we're going to have 4 points. You're going to have celebration, you're going to have the situation, you're going to have the solution, and then you're going to have the significance. And so, first off, the celebration. starting in verse 1. It says, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. It's a party, right? Now, whenever you're thinking about a wedding, you need to kind of put aside this idea of our weddings where we have this just lavish, opulent ceremony, and then we all go stand around and drink punch for like an hour and make small talk. That's not, the wedding. Okay, for the Jews, a wedding, especially in a little rural place, a little place where you don't have a lot of excitement, a lot of festivities going on, a wedding was a big deal. A wedding was the kind of thing that's going to shut down the community. Everyone's going to attend. It's going to be a party that lasts for days. Some even went on for like a week, where it was just festivity after festivity after festivity they partied. Okay, so Jesus is there at a wedding celebration. There's a big deal. And Cana was a small town, right? We know that Jesus is from Nazareth, and I think historians figured that about the time of Jesus, Nazareth had a population of about 500. Well, Cana is smaller than Nazareth, and it's about 9 miles away. So if you think about it, Jesus, it says he was invited to the wedding. He knows the bride and groom. Chances are there's some relationship, even family relationship between Nazareth and Cana. You have friends and family that would live in both communities, right? It's just like some of y'all live in Eddy, some of y'all live in Moody, some of y'all in McGregor, right? But we're all close enough together that we have family relationships and friendships across nearby towns. Same thing here. And apparently they were close enough that, as we're going to see, Jesus' mom is actually in a little bit of position of authority because she's bossing the servants around. And so Jesus is in attendance, and as a rabbi, his disciples come with him, because that's the way it works, right? It's not just they go to class with Jesus every now and then. They live with him, walk with him. Everywhere he goes, everything he does, almost, that could get awkward. Everywhere he goes, everything he does, they're there with him to witness, to copy, to follow, to become like their teacher. So he goes to a wedding, disciples go to the wedding too. All right. So another little interesting kind of tidbit here, that it's a wedding where Jesus kind of steps out and announces, where he just kind of comes out publicly. Because a marriage is the number one illustration that God uses to describe the relationship between him and his people. Right? He is often in the Old Testament, when the nation of Israel is disobedient to God, they're characterized as adulterous. Right? God describes them as a bride committing adultery. The church is known as the bride of Christ. Whenever we get to heaven, the celebration and just the good times, the richness and joy of heaven is described as a wedding feast. And so this idea of marriage, of a wedding, is very central to the relationship, as an illustration of the relationship we have with God. Because it is this selfless care for the other person that is signified. And that's what a marriage is about. And that is what God's love for us is. And that's what our love that we return back to God is, this selfless love for the other. And this is the setting where Jesus is going to reveal himself somewhat. The situation, right? They're at a celebration, but now there's a situation that arises. Verse 3. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now, they run out of wine. All right, so here's a little word on wine. All right, running out of wine, aside from this being like a party foul, like, dude, you're out of wine, right? It's this would have been a big deal. Like I said, the wedding celebration is a major, major community celebration. The way it worked back then is you would get betrothed, and then you would have like a year or so of preparation where the husband is actually preparing the place where he would then bring the bride. Does that sound familiar? Jesus goes to prepare a place. But you have the situation where that's what the husband-to-be is doing. He's preparing to receive the bride and even preparing for the celebration. So to run out of wine would have been a twofold kind of not just a social faux pas, but it would have been a really shameful slight. Because one, it would have been bad hospitality. Right? Nowadays, it's like, hey, you kind of run out of drinks, but like, oh, well, no big deal. We don't get as offended. But in a culture where hospitality is a very, very high virtue, this would have been insulting to the guests for them to run out of wine. And secondly, it would have communicated to the family of the bride, he can't take care of business. He can't even plan a party. How is he going to take care of your little girl? That's what it would have communicated to the bride. And so this would have been a very shameful, shameful moment for the bridegroom, and Jesus steps in. This was no small thing. Now about wine. All right, this is, I don't see any reason to believe that this is merely grape juice. The word in the language is wine. And in that culture, they basically had two things to drink, wine or water. And you couldn't just go drink the water for pretty much the same reason you don't drink the water in Mexico. Amen? Anyone been outside the country, and what are you told? Don't drink the water. I was in Peru, and it was there was someone who, in our group, that just out of habit, not thinking, used the tap water to brush their teeth and got sick. Right? And so you don't drink the water. Well, it's okay, so what do? So they have wine. Well, you can't drink just wine. If all you drink is wine, one, is not very good for hydration, and two, you're getting drunk. So what they would do is they would mix the wine and the water. And so whenever you hear, in the Bible talking about drinking wine, or, back then everybody's drinking wine. It's like everybody's running around alcoholics. No, it's just what they drank. Because you mix in the water with the wine, right, the fermentation, the alcohol in the wine kind of purifies the water, but yet the water dilutes the wine so you don't get drunk. And so you would have, this would be the situation. It's not, that they're boozing it up and partying. It's just that this is how their beverages worked. Okay, it'd be like if we ran out of sweet tea. That's a party killer. Okay. Okay, so Mary asked Jesus for help. Why does she ask him for help? Okay, you're kind of, say you're in charge, or maybe you're just involved, right? You're helping out with the situation. Oh no, we're out of drinks. Here, let me go ask my carpenter son for help. What is Jesus going to do? He's a carpenter. What does he know about wine, right? And so it just seems a little strange that she would ask him. Now, some people have said, well, he is Jesus, Son of God, worker of miracles. She knew he could do something. Maybe, but up to this point, we have no indication of any miraculous works from him. We don't have any indication except for some really weird writings from like 3 or 4 centuries later that talk about some stuff he did during his childhood that seems completely made up. But we have no indication he's been a miracle worker up to this point, so I don't know that she's expecting a miracle. But here's what I do know. Joseph is gone. Right? Aside from the birth narrative of Jesus, Joseph is nowhere to be seen. So at some point during Jesus growing up, Joseph dies, which means Jesus, as the oldest son, is the head of the house. Now, if there's a problem in the household, who do you go to solve it? To the head of the household. Now, if there's a problem and you go to the head of the household who happens to be the Son of God, you think he's going to have good solutions? Think whenever there's a problem in the household that Jesus just knows what to do, knows how to solve it, knows how to fix it. And so here you have years of Mary having the experience of, I can go to Jesus. He'll know what to do. And so they're in this situation and the wine's gone. What are we going to do? Hey, I'll go ask Jesus. He'll know what to do. So I don't know that it's necessarily her expecting something miraculous. She's just trusting. She just knows he solves problems. We got a problem. Let's go ask him. And so I think that is probably what is going on there. Now, a note about this word woman. Because, if you read it kind of with our cultural tone, woman, what's that got to do with me, right? That's kind of how that comes across if you're not really paying attention. Something gets lost in translation. Because in the Greek, that word is actually more like a ma'am. It's more of an honorific, more a term of respect. Like we would use ma'am or some form of that, right? He's just like, woman, why you bother me, right? It's, ma'am or madam. It is a caring word. What's interesting, though, it's not an intimate one. It's not a close familial word that you would expect a son to use towards his mom. It's the way you would address some other non-relative woman. And so that's a little strange. And some commentators have said that this is kind of a point where Jesus is signaling, hey, that part of my life is over. That chapter of my life under your authority of that relationship is over. I'm focused on the cross. And that from this moment forward, everything he is about and everything he does is for that purpose. We even have in Matthew 12 where he is teaching and his family comes to, I believe they come to kind of ask him to come home because he's been making some crazy claims. And so they come to see him and somebody says, hey, your mother and your brothers are outside, because the crowd was so thick in the house they couldn't get to him. They couldn't even get in the house. And someone says, hey, your mother and brothers are outside. And Jesus says, who is my mother and my brothers? Here are my mother and my brothers. And he gestures to his disciples. And he says, whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother. So at this point, as he begins his ministry, he is kind of stepping out and saying that life is gone. I have my focus. I have my goal. I have my purpose. And so some commentators think that's a little indication of what's going on there, because he uses a very neutral, respectful, but not intimate familial term to refer to his mom. I don't know, that may or may not be true, but it definitely fits with the narrative. He says, my hour has not yet come. Now, there's a lot of speculation about what this means, because a lot of times when he refers to my hour, he's talking about crucifixion. He's talking about what's going to happen when the soldiers come for him in the garden and everything after that. Now, what is he referring to here? Like I said, there's lots of different speculation by commentators and theologians. What I'm going to land on, and I wouldn't get dogmatic about this, but I think that what he's saying is that it's not his intention yet to publicly declare himself. That she's coming and saying, hey, you need to solve something. He's saying, no, this isn't my time. This isn't my role here. And what's interesting is we kind of see is that he doesn't do the miracle openly. As we look at what he does here in a minute, he does not, behold, have wine, right? There's no big, fanfare or anything that goes on. He does it quietly, does it behind the scenes. And so I think that may be what he is referring to, but out of respect of his mother, and out of respect, out of the impact it will have on his disciples. Because we see in verse 11 that it says they saw this and they believed. Right? That it is going to have this impact upon them, and so he chooses to act quietly. Because he gives us a solution. Verse 6. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, to the servants, fill the water pots with water. And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called to the bridegroom. And he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. But you have kept the good until now. A few notes about what's going on here. Notice they fill it to the brim. These things are filled. No room for anything else. There could be no charge of anything being added. There could be no, he just had some and he kind of mixed it in there. Something. None of that. It was water to the top, all the way to the rim. So there is no accusation of tampering that could be possible. Also, as I said, there's no fanfare. There's no dramatics. There's no theatrics. There's nothing where he is. There's times when he heals someone right in front of the crowd for everyone to just marvel at what has happened. Not here. Here it does it kind of very quietly. Because think about this. Ask yourself this question. Here's what happens. We need some wine. Okay, get those pitchers, get those water pots, fill them with water, draw some, and take it to the guy. And when the guy tastes it, he tastes just amazing wine. When did the water turn to wine? Was it in the pots? When they filled it? Whenever they drew it? Whenever he tasted it? At what point did it turn into wine? We can't really say. It doesn't tell us. when the water turned into wine. He just kind of subtly did it. And I can't help but wonder, I can almost imagine that maybe he slipped out. Right? There's no fanfare. There's nothing here where everyone's awing and oohing over Jesus. I can almost see, I'm not going to get dogmatic about this, but I can almost see, he says, fill those with water. Now take that to the master of the feast. Right? And off he slips with his disciples. So that there's not a big deal made about it. But the realization of it was done away from Jesus. Right? The realization that this water has turned into wine was done where Jesus wasn't around. So much that the master of the feast doesn't realize what's happened, and he gives credit to the bridegroom. Wow, look what you've done. You've saved the best for last. Right? And I don't know that a great big deal needs to be made of this, right? Because we all do this, right? If you're having a party, you prepare all the food. Maybe you take a little finger food. You get on Pinterest and find all the little cute things you can carve a watermelon into or whatever, and you set up the spread, and it's this nice thing. Your guests show up, and everybody's having a good time, and the food's starting to run out. Okay, let me run to the pantry. So instead of the nice, tray of, setting with the chips and the dip, now you just have some bags of chips on the counter, and then those run out, and you're like digging in your fridge for the leftovers, right? As the party goes, right, the quality kind of dwindles, right? That's how we all do it, right? Because you weren't expecting it to run out. But that's basically what's going on here. But the guy goes, wow, you saved the best for last. And so I think that there's, it's kind of strange because Jesus does not get the credit here. The bridegroom gets the credit. I mean, you have the servants and you have his disciples, but as far as everyone else knows, that the wine came from the bridegroom. It was just a party, and hey, here's some wine, and wow, it's the good stuff at last. I've read some commentators that want to draw some analogies or symbolism about the goodness and the richness and the joy of heaven, and maybe that's true. Maybe that can be read there. But I think this is just a moment of expression of the difference, and of Jesus giving some grace to someone else. Because the man was in hot water, was he not? We already said, ran out of wine. That's a twofold, shameful act that he would not plan for the party properly. And Jesus just saved him. Jesus just said, here, we'll let him have the credit, and slipped away quietly. So what's the significance? Okay, he's turned some water into wine, kept the party going. Right, so that's one thing. We know that Jesus is not a fuddy-duddy. He's not a curmudgeon. He's not a prude. He does not mind some celebration, some joy, some festivity. Verse 11. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, brothers, disciples, and they did not stay for many days. So he does this miracle, first miracle. What are some of the significance of it? One, it reinforced to the disciples who he is. I mean, they've already seen John the Baptist say, there he is, Lamb of God. Right? They've already heard him teach. They've already proclaimed, you are the Christ, the chosen one, the anointed one, the Messiah, the King of Israel. They've already said these things about him. They believe it. But now it gets reinforced. Now it gets driven home because its glory is manifested. Because he shows that he possesses the power of creation. Every miracle he does, there's a specific kind of attribute of God that is on display. This one is the power of creation. Because there wasn't wine before, but there's wine now. Who could possibly do that? So they would have seen this miracle. And he does it so that you may believe, right? That's why John is writing it. So that you may believe he is the Son of God, and by belief in him have new life. But what's interesting, significance of this, is it kind of ties a neat little theological bow around what his ultimate purpose is going to be. I don't think it's a small thing that his first miracle involved wine. And then on the night before his arrest, he has supper with his disciples where wine plays a significant role. I don't know that is coincidence. he takes jars, big water pots holding 20 to 30 gallons, so there's barrels of water that is intended for purification. Okay, those water pots, it was for ritual purification. The Jews of this time were very, very devout about their ritual cleansing. Every little thing, if you did this, you have to go cleanse. If you did that, you have to go cleanse. If you touch this, you have to wash. If you do that, you have to wash. During this meal, you have that ceremony. During this festivity, you have this washing. Everything involved some kind of ceremonial cleansing, not just because you want to have clean hands, but spiritually, symbolically, that you are cleansing yourself before God. Of course, we can never cleanse ourselves and purify ourselves before God. But Jesus takes what is intended by the Jews for a purification ceremony, turns it into wine, and then fast forward to the end of his ministry, and the wine symbolizes his blood, which purchases our purification in the new covenant.
Every time I feel the walls closing, cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear. You've ransomed me with blood.